All right, let's talk about the Eiffel Tower. I mean, it's one of the most famous structures in the entire world, a true global icon. But what if I told you that the story you think you know about it is almost completely backwards? That it was hated, it was ridiculed, and it was scheduled to be torn down and sold for scrap.
You know, when we see the Eiffel Tower today, this is what comes to mind, right? It's the symbol of Paris, of romance, of elegance. It's the backdrop for millions of proposals and, I don't know, billions of photos. It just feels like it's always been there, a permanent, beloved piece of the city. But you're going to want to hold that thought.
Because back in 1887, this is what the cultural elite of Paris thought about it. Useless and monstrous. And believe me, that's just the beginning. This wasn't some minor disagreement. It was an all-out cultural war. So, how in the world did we get from a monstrous pile of iron to the icon we know and love today?
That is the huge question we're tackling here. Was it an icon or an eyesore? We're going to uncover just how this incredibly controversial structure managed to win over the entire world. And honestly, the first surprise is a big one.
That's right. The Eiffel Tower was never, ever meant to last. It was literally built with an expiration date. It had a 20-year permit for the 1889 World's Fair, and after that, the plan was to tear it right down. So yeah, the ultimate symbol of Parisian permanence was designed to be completely disposable.
So to really get why this temporary tower was even built, we have to rewind the clock and look at the politics of 19th century France. This was never just about building something tall. It was about forging a whole new national identity, out of iron.
Okay, so in the 1880s, France was kind of a mess. The government, called the Third Republic, was super shaky, just torn apart by all these different political groups. They were desperate for a symbol of strength, of modernity. So for the 1889 World's Fair, which was timed perfectly for the 100th anniversary of the French Revolution, they decided to build something so bold it would basically scream to the world that France was back and it was a unified industrial powerhouse. And Gustave Eiffel, the man whose company designed it, he knew exactly what was on the line. I mean, in his own words, this was never just a tower. To him, it was a monument to a whole new era, a century of industry and of science and of progress, all things that he believed were born from the ideals of the revolution.
But, having a grand vision is one thing. Actually building a 300-meter-tall iron tower in the 1880s, well, that was seen as pretty much impossible. So let's get into the incredible engineering that actually made it happen.
The absolute key principle behind the whole tower is something called structural optimality. And it's actually a beautifully simple idea. You use the absolute minimum amount of material you need to get the maximum amount of strength. Every single beam, every rivet, it all has a critical job to do. There is zero waste, no fluff.
And here is where it gets truly brilliant. That same exact principle is what gives the tower its iconic shape. You see that elegant, graceful curve? It is not just for looks. It's a mathematical equation made real. The entire shape is precisely calculated to resist the force of the wind, channeling it harmlessly down to the ground. It's a perfect case of form following function. Its beauty is literally a result of its brilliant engineering.
So, the final iron structure weighs 7,300 tons. Now, that sounds like a massive, enormous number, right? Incredibly heavy.
But get ready for this, because this is where the genius of that structural optimality just becomes mind-blowing. If you could take all 7,300 tons of that iron, melt it all down, and pour it into the square area at the tower's base, it would only fill it up to a height of about 2.5 inches. That's it. The structure is, for all intents and purposes, mostly air. It is just an astonishingly efficient and lightweight design.
And the construction itself was a modern marvel. I mean, it went up in just over 2 years, which was an insane speed for the time. It was put together like a giant high-tech Lego set from over 18,000 unique pre-made parts. And maybe the most impressive thing of all, thanks to Eiffel's super strict safety standards, which were totally unheard of back then, not a single worker died during the tower's main construction.
So, let's switch gears and get to the human side of the story and see how this amazing feat of engineering was actually received. Because while the engineers were celebrating, the artists of Paris were, well, sharpening their knives. A full-on cultural war erupted against Gustave Eiffel and his tower. The words they used were just brutal. They called it a gigantic black smokestack that was going to crush the beauty of Paris, from Notre Dame to the Louvre, under its barbaric bulk. They didn't see progress, they saw an invasion of industrial ugliness into the very heart of their beautiful city.
And the attacks got really personal.
The artistic establishment, led by big names like Charles Garnier, the architect of the famous Paris Opera, they publicly mocked Eiffel. They basically saw him as a boilermaker who was getting way too big for his britches.
Which brings us to one of the most famous stories from this whole protest. The writer Guy de Maupassant. He supposedly hated the tower so much that he ate lunch in its restaurant every single day. And when people asked him why, he'd say it was because it was the only place in all of Paris where he couldn't see the blasted thing.
So with all of this hatred, and with that 20-year demolition order just ticking away, how on earth did the towers survive? How did something that was built to be so temporary end up becoming eternal?
Well, first, despite what all the critics said, it was a massive, massive hit with the public at the World's Fair. But the real savior showed up right at the last minute, in 1909. Just as it was about to be torn down, the tower proved to be the perfect antenna for the brand-new science of radio telegraphy. And this was a huge deal. It allowed for transatlantic communication, and during World War I, it became a vital military asset, jamming German radio signals and intercepting enemy messages that literally changed the course of battles. Its utility is what saved it, and that's what allowed it to stick around long enough to become the icon that draws millions of visitors today.
So the tower was saved, but the story has one last absolutely fantastic secret. A private little space that Gustave Eiffel built just for himself, hidden in plain sight right at the very top of his creation.
That's right, almost 1,000 feet above the streets of Paris, Eiffel had a small private apartment built. It was pretty cozy, furnished with a grand piano and comfy furniture. He used it for quiet reflection and to entertain a very few select guests, including Thomas Edison. The Parisian elite were desperate to get in, offering him fortunes to rent it for just one night, but he always refused. It was his own private sanctuary in the sky. So, we've gone from a useless and monstrous temporary structure to an eternal symbol of engineering genius and romance, complete with a secret apartment at the top. It's a journey that really proves that sometimes the things we reject at first can become the very symbols we end up holding most dear. Which leaves us with just one final question to think about. What does the Eiffel Tower symbolize to you?